Good afternoon. Welcome to you all to Pusey House. My name is George Westaver, the principal here. Each time we gather for a lecture or for worship, I feel, particularly for a lecture, astounded and thrilled to see people in chapel again after a year of Zoom lectures. It's a delight to be able to gather here back in chapel. I'm going to, obviously as we move toward the autumn, we'll meet in probably a smaller, more convivial space in the Ursa room just next door. It's a delight to have Dominic Burbidge here to be our speaker, but first I'm going to hand the microphone over to Jonathan Price. I'm also thrilled whenever I see Jonathan after so many months of communications through Zoom. It's a delight to have him here with us from the Warsaw Annex of Pusey House. His first year as our John and Daria Barry Lay Academic Fellow. Jonathan, I'll hand you over. Oh, you can use that one.
Thank you. Welcome to you present, and welcome to those watching this online. If you enjoy what you hear tonight, you can find our lecture series on the Pusey House website, puseyhouse.co.uk, where we have these collected, and also on the YouTube channel where they'll be made permanently available. We won't include, the Q&A will go out with the live stream, but the Q&A won't be included on the permanent presence on the web. So ask any question that you like during the Q&A, which will be about 25 minutes after the lecture, which will last about 50 minutes. The lecturer, Dr. Dominic Burbidge, has started a really wonderful institute here in Oxford, the Canterbury Institute. And it's an institute that brings many good things that have never quite fully faded away back into the space of the present university, especially the understanding that the university is meant to be a place where the search for truth is pursued in a unified fashion, or with the assumption that eventually these roads, these means, these faculties for pursuing truth will converge on one truth, thus the university. And the virtue that's most appropriate to the pursuit of that truth is humility. So the Canterbury Institute is founded with humility in the pursuit of truth as its goal, at the heart of the university, that is in general, and this university in particular. And Barry Fellows are brought over, they have their fees paid, and they have a stipend, and they're encouraged to join reading groups, to come to the great facilities down on St. Aldate's. Dominic has started that, it's his initiative, and it's going very well, and I'm happy also to be affiliated with it as a senior reader. Now, Dominic Burbidge today will speak to us about a topic which might have surprised some of you, and I hope the surprise is one of the reasons why you were here. That is the covenant, restoring the university to the covenant. Before preparing this lecture, he did a DPhil in Oxford, spent some time in Princeton, doing a postdoc in the program that Robbie George runs in Princeton, the Madison program, James Madison program, and then came back and has been affiliated with St. Peter's College since then, and with the law faculty in the program for the foundations of law and constitutional government. So I won't say anything more until the Q&A, where I welcome you to ask questions, and for now I'll turn it over to Dr. Dominic Burbidge for a talk on recalling the university to the covenant.
Thank you, Father George, Lady Scruton, Dr. Price. Thank you for having me in this wonderful institute, wonderful place, wonderful home, not just a house, that I've had the pleasure of seeking to support from afar, and now have the pleasure of being here in person. If there is one place that best epitomizes, best illustrates C.S. Lewis's learning in wartime, I would say it is Pusey House during these difficult times. So I thank you for also all the work with students in supporting them at this difficult time. So I consider us a bit like a man who married, and shortly after marrying, his wife became pregnant, but he was called away for war. His reasoning, his moral reasoning, was that the war was part of protecting his family, so he had that duty. But the war is now prolonged. It's been raging for a long time, and he worries about having never seen his new child. At marriage, he was named man and wife, named husband. He would be named father. In correspondence, he is named father, but he doesn't feel that he's a father. In fact, although his love for family grows and comes to the fore in the face of death and helps him struggle forward, he worries that when he returns, he will not be recognized because he is more soldier than father. The covenant is something deep. It's a solemn promise. It's stronger than a contract by means of its relational depth. It's something which marks actors as committed to one another in their whole beings, not just in their actions. Relational depth, in turn, depends on knowing something about the other person, specifically knowing about their needs. A core feature of the covenant, therefore, is that one works to know the other person as they are, through which relational depth builds and the meaning and significance of actions in history take shape. Over the course of human history, the university has developed as a specialized institution for the pursuit of truth, and thereby plays an almost unique role in fostering the covenantal relationship with the Creator. The relationship of universities with the truth, however, is, as we know, severely contested. Relativism towards the truth as a way of managing differences is an important feature of governance, and that has translated into the argument that universities can become utopian examples of social harmony for the rest of society by best displaying inclusivity. So a residue truth project still remains within this. In terms of communicating to other corporations and taxpayers that social inclusion is perfectly possible, even if these institutions started off among the most exclusive. Academic disciplines are secondary to this goal. Their ideas of excellence and the pursuit of truth do not give them license to be exclusionary. This I find to be a very interesting dilemma. It cuts across disciplines and involves the notion of truth itself, even if its roots are more narrowly Hegelian, Marxist, feminist, or Foucauldian. But despite those narrow sources, it is clear that the trend has become relevant, not just for philosophy and politics, and has the potential to reframe all disciplines in identity terms and to transform the academy as a whole. Now, in the context of a dominant view that a university's overall aim should be to foster social harmony and material well-being, rather than the pursuit of truth, this lecture offers some comment on the sources of this problem and then gives 5 possible theoretical routes for preserving or re-establishing the pursuit of truth at the center of the academy, and in these terms recall the university to the fostering of the relational depth of the covenant. Have been very affected by the work of David Graeber, who, among other things, is a social anthropologist. He writes this book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which instructs us on how much debt is a feature of societies and cultures throughout the world, historically and geographically. So he presents one of his chapters with this starting quote from the Satapatha Brahmana. In being born, every being is born as debt owed to the gods, the saints, the fathers, and to men. If one makes a sacrifice, it is because of a debt owing to the gods from birth. If one recites a sacred text, it is because of a debt owing to the saints. If one wishes for offspring, it is because of a debt due to the fathers from birth. And if one gives hospitality, it is because of a debt owing to men. There are core aspects to the covenant: that we are named, that we learn the name of God, that we know that God looks out for our every needs, that there is meaning in suffering, even in suffering, that while God has no needs, he makes himself needy for us. He needs us to know him and love him. We are called to deepen in our covenant despite our mortality, which seems like a contradiction. And within our established sense of God through philosophy, theology, it's often referred that aspects of God can be understood in terms of the transcendentals, often listed as truth, beauty, goodness, sometimes also unity. If we run with that argument, that sense of being is synonymous with truth, beauty, goodness, unity, it becomes clear how the quest for knowledge, the quest for truth that humanity has, currently led by the university, is part of that struggle to know the widest meaning out there, and therefore to know God in his being. Let me quote again from David Graeber's book. Even the very earliest Vedic poems, composed sometime between 1500 and 1200 BC, evince a constant concern with debt, which is treated as synonymous with guilt and sin. There are numerous prayers pleading with the gods to liberate the worshipper from the shackles or bonds of debt. In these hymns, Yama, the god of death, figures prominently. To be in debt was to have a weight placed on you by death, to be under any sort of unfulfilled obligation, any unkept promise to gods or to man was to live in the shadow of death. Often even in the very early texts, debt seems to stand in for a broader sense of inner suffering, from which one begs the gods for release. The conclusion that human existence is itself a form of debt. So I fear Oxford students, I fear Barry scholars, Rhodes scholars, because of the debt they carry. And if I can play a role, it will be to remind them of that debt. So the properties of God, unity, truth, being, and goodness, take shape through the purpose of the university in its pursuit of truth. But to this, we are confronted with the reality of a fragmented notion of truth. I'll quote here from Alistair MacIntyre, the philosopher and historian of thought, from his book, God, Philosophy, Universities. To whom falls the task of integrating the various disciplines, of considering the bearing of each on the others, and of asking how each contributes to the overall understanding of nature and the order of things? The answer is no one. But even this answer is misleading, for there is no sense in the contemporary university that there is such a task, that something that matters is being left undone. And so the very notion of the nature and order of things, of a single universe, different aspects of which are objects of inquiry for the various disciplines, but in such a way that each aspect needs to be related to every other, this notion no longer informs the enterprise of the contemporary university. it has become an irrelevant concept. For by either eliminating mention of God from the curriculum altogether, departments of religious studies concern themselves with various types of belief in God, not with God, or by restricting reference to God to departments of theology, such universities render their secular curriculum godless. And this godlessness is, as already noted, not just a matter of the subtraction of God from the range of objects studied, but also and quite as much the absence of any integrated and overall view of things. What would it be for a university not to be godless in this way? Its curriculum would have to presuppose an underlying unity to the inquiries of each discipline into the various aspects of the natural and the social. Over and above the questions posed in each of these distinct disciplinary inquiries, the questions of the physicist, the biologist, or the historian, or the economist, there would be questions about what bearing each of them has on the others and how each contributes to an overall understanding of the nature of things. We have two central challenges to the contemporary university. The first, the relativism in the notion of truth, and the second, related though distinct, is the belief that knowledge is power. I'll consider each of these in turn and then look to the 5 ways, theoretical routes to perhaps overcoming them. So this first one, relativism in the notion of truth. This can take 3 forms. 1, weak relativism. So I learn truths, not the truth. I have a truth. Second is a strong relativism. There is no such thing as truth for anybody. All is constructed. And a philosopher friend of mine showed me that, in fact, in the philosophy faculty, weak relativism is seen as quite a robust argument, but strong relativism not. So, in fact, the irony here is that, as I see it, strong relativism, in terms of everyone's truth being a form of constructed truth, being something much more common within the social sciences and particularly anthropology. These are the typical weak relativism, strong relativism that most of us would be comfortable with. But I want to add here a third form of relativism, which is relational relativism. This is the idea that the truth project is regardless of persons, regardless of the encounter with persons. So truth has no relationship with being, if we think back to the transcendentals. My encounter with the truth is impersonal. It is regardless of who is saying it. Or, in a different formulation, my encounter with the truth is entirely personal, in the sense of constructed by that person I am in dialogue with. But ultimately, in either manifestation, relational relativism has no regard for the authority of persons in the truth. This came up this week in a discussion with students about a portion of Joseph Raz's argument in the book The Authority of Law, which is a collection of essays, where he has a really interesting, in my view, interesting example of which he believes helps prove the distinctiveness of the positivity of law. That is, law regardless of any notion of moral right and wrong. In this example, he says that it is perfectly reasonable and appropriate that a Jew seeking to be Orthodox asks a Catholic expert in rabbinical law, "What should I do?" Which is a fascinating dilemma, because what Joseph Raz says, that the ability of the Catholic expert in rabbinical law to answer the questions to the Jew of what should I do, proves that the structure of the argument or the legal code itself has a distinctive quality regardless of one's own membership of it and regardless of one's own belief of whether it is true or not. So in this case, assuming that the Catholic believes this not to be true. This is an example here within jurisprudence, but something writ larger, that in a very diverse world, while pursuing the truth, one can approach a sense of the objectivity of truth, or seek to, regardless of the relationships, the encountering relationships of the authority over the truth. Interestingly, a Jewish student in this discussion said they couldn't follow that argument because it would require the authority of a rabbi to give proper direction to the question of what should be done, regardless of the level of knowledge of the rabbinical law. That makes perfect sense to me. But what's interesting is how in the university we do not have that sense, that the authority of the person by their stature is sufficient for the giving of advice of what should be done, regardless of technical expertise. So here are examples. These were examples of relativism with respect to the truth, weak, strong, relational relativism. What flows from this relativism? The university qua institution derives its authority, therefore, from a different source to the truth. It may be national legislation, it may be compliance with standards, it may be from the EU project of integration and mixture, for example, the Erasmus program, that we help build ever closer union through universities. It may be from being a perfect example of a society organized through consent. It may be through its role in the fight against racism and sexism. It may be through technological innovation and scientific breakthrough. The second problem, knowledge is power. This I take as distinct and separate from the claim of relativism. Under this view, which of course we'll know is associated with Michel Foucault, I would hesitate there because some Foucault experts say that he never really said or framed it as knowledge is power, but certainly the interpretation of Foucault is to bring these two concepts to be almost synonymous. Under that argument, human relations are reducible to power dynamics. That is, that there's always one person dominating another in relations. That means making them do something that they would otherwise not have done. It assumes an individual who acts without relations, which is a point of criticism from my point of view, which I won't go into. And it has this particular strand that the subtle, subjective, subliminal is more coercive because undetected or less transparent or less accountable. There is no way of knowing who is on the side of the oppressed and who is on the side of the oppressor, but there is a fact that oppression exists all around us. What flows from this belief that knowledge is power? The question of impact of the university becomes central, that we audit our impact, that we self-criticize, assess, we are held account for impact, that free speech does not equal speech. That is, our notion of free speech, which in the history of liberalism presupposes human equality, is in fact not something that one can assume as working in an environment of equal human beings. Equality is something to be achieved, not something one should assume. There should be no curricula that galvanize oppression or reproduce power dynamics, that teachers' biases, values, backgrounds, and identities can be criteria for whether they are hired or dismissed. How someone is addressed, for example, in the use of pronouns, can be a form of oppression. There is no place for the moral formation of students or the mastering of internal habits related to the practice of the pursuit of truth. But the covenant is inextricably bound to the practice of being named. And here I do think the debate on pronouns is really interesting. A covenantal understanding looks in terms of a people set apart by being named. This is not that they are privileged so much as they are in deeper debt through the privileges given by God. They are named, and under the Christian account, this is everyone, children of God, and God is named as a father, masculine. There is a family name. Maybe it's being a member of the human race, maybe it's the communion of saints. The operation of naming is, I think, interesting from an anthropological point of view here. That we are named not just as individuals, but we are named as family member. And in my personal background of spending a lot of time in East Africa, looking at the ways in which people are named by generation. So this is not named according to family, but according to the group with which you were born at that time. So you might be the generation of famine, you might be the generation of bounty, you might be the generation of colonialism or radical disruption. But you are named, therefore, as a collective, and with that comes a sense of your responsibility. In the move towards self-determination of one's naming, we have also seen a decline in named schools of thought within the university, that someone would prefer to be known as a member of a school of thought rather than for their individual scholarship, because of helping that project of the school of thought. But here, the covenant follows the mapping of marriage as a solemn promise of being named man and wife, and through children being named fathers and mothers. God names you individually and collectively. Your name describes your debt and your responsibility. In the face of this zeitgeist, this consensus around themes of the relativism of truth, or that truth is power, what sort of responses could be brought to bear? This is a point of where I invite a lot of feedback and discussion, because it's one that I am struggling with personally. So I offer here 5, and I am going to criticize them, so they're not going to solve all our problems, perhaps. The first would be to adopt the language of victimhood for the truth seekers. So this would be to say that the enterprise of the university is made up of the claims of victimhood of the vulnerable, and that I have a role in that of being a victim to the problems I have explained or imagined, and that I, as a victim, should have my 5 minutes in the panel discussion. This I see among students, especially conservative students, who are increasingly adopting vocabulary of safe space to describe the ways in which their own views feel under threat and they require some support or defense. A second option would be to double down on the sense that the university is about rationalism. So this is that the focus on social harmony is not too related to the main project of reason, and that I can hold people to account on logic. There is a science of logic. I can strictly enforce it in evaluating arguments, and hopefully then the truth will prevail. This has a lot of mileage, I think, and I think we'll see this play out a lot, especially with those, obviously with science, technology, engineering, maths. Also in terms of tech's influence on the university, the funding that comes through joint projects orientated towards technical innovation that helps our material well-being. There will still be the need for appropriate social harmony and representation, and there is a threat that the project of innovation or reason still is put secondary to these questions of social harmony, but overall the material benefits remain demonstrable, and the recourse to logic or reason is something that people detached from ordinary jobs may be more impartial in applying. A challenge here for me is that sometimes here the logos of God, the word, is being taken out and replaced with logic, which is not fully appreciative of the extent to which you do not know the thing that you are seeking. This was in a very small slip by the infamous commentator Ben Shapiro, who, when challenged in university about how I can't talk in a conversation at my university because I'm said to not represent the most affected group of this particular issue, he, in his way, went very argumentative and said, you know, that's the thing I despise most. We need free speech. Everyone participates equally because God is logic. That seems to me to run into the danger of producing a boundary to your notion of God that not only may frustrate the theological quest, but can put limits on the creativity to disciplines. So it works insofar as the project is reduced to the STEM world. A third option is Thomas More. So in these last three options, I talk about individual people, individual authors who have inspired me. Thomas More, we all know very well. In the biography by R.W. Chambers, he describes how much More had to navigate a context of always needing to praise the higher authority, to stay in office, and even to progress in office. So one route here, this third suggestion, would be to accept that a real dedication to a pursuit of universal, timeless, unified truth is not going to be the mainstream, and just accept that. And so your role is to navigate the politics of a dominant group that lies with a different view, being prepared to use flattery. So Chambers gives this one example, which is drawn from More's writing, about how in an after-dinner speech by Cardinal Wolsey, he was then seeking feedback. And of course, it had to be complimentary, supportive. And so he describes how each, from lowest to highest, would give a long speech in praise of the speech. And your speech had to be even more praising than the one before you. But to More's surprise, an uneducated priest who was one before him gave such an eloquent speech of praise in favor of the speech that More had nothing he felt he could add. And then it came to him that he could solve this by giving his speech of praise in Latin, under the argument that he would be happy to be outrun, this is a quote, he would be happy to be outrun by a horse, but not by an ass who doesn't know Latin. So we can be in that zone of praising. And interestingly, in Chambers' biography, he mentions at one point that one way of viewing More's project within that world, which is of course contested because people who love More would think he's simply a man of principle, and you find yet this contextual opportunism in aspects of his career. One way to understand this, Chambers believes, is that there is a way in which you can feign defeat in an argument while inserting the concepts or arguments in your opponent such that they think it is their own. Could that be a route for those on the margin of the university? That you listen, argue, insert the concepts, allow others to take praise for them, and therefore have them heal aspects of the zeitgeist. Here's the criticism. This is a very depressing lecture because, you know, every positive view gets a slap in the face shortly after. That Thomas More could be accused of, in fact, fanning the flames of an absolutist sense of monarchy by joining in the project of flattery of the highest. Could that be the fate of those who approach the university seeking to flatter in order to insert or continue their role? Those who, for example, say, I will do everything until I get tenure, and then I will speak freely. Do they not, over the course of most, if not all, of their career, in fact, reinforce the hierarchy that keeps others out from the more noble ideals that they thought they were dedicated to? I contrast here Thomas More with Sir Robert Filmer, who, of course, with his views on the divine right of king, is mixed both in terms of theological justification and also flattery. The fourth option is Leo Strauss, and I'm always hesitant to mention Leo Strauss because there will always be an American in the audience who is an expert, but I'm going to do it anyway. So Strauss, complicated man, offers an esoteric approach, which could be that he's offering it as something you should do or just something you should know about that others have done in the history of thought. Here I put it as, what if we were to run with it as a method? So a quote here from Leora Batnitsky on Leo Strauss. So she writes, in a 1936 essay on the political science of Maimonides and Farabi, Strauss returns to the meaning of philosophy and its relationship to law. Obedience to the law and the philosophical meaning of the law are two different matters that are reflected in what Strauss argues is Maimonides' dual conception of law. So on the one hand, the exterior, literal meaning of the law serves to sustain the political community in which certain forms of behavior and belief are required, while the ideal meaning of the law is a matter of philosophical speculation only for those who are capable of such speculation. So this dual conception of law parallels the dual character of the writing, which offers what Strauss calls a moderate reading meant for the masses, and what he calls a radical reading meant for the philosophical reader. According to Strauss, Maimonides is able to properly balance the relation between praxis, obedience to the law, and theory, the mystery of law's origin, not by conflating them, but by keeping them in continual dialectical tension. The theological, political predicament of modernity stems in this reading from the modern commitment to the self-sufficiency of reason that results in reason's self-destruction. Esotericism is a means towards preserving the limits of philosophy and revelation or law vis-a-vis one another. So this is a fourth route, that through an esotericism, one retains a notion of truth hidden, buried, that you play the role of the modern researcher seeking material well-being for society and social harmony in utopian vision for the university, but buried within that is the preservation of concepts of universal, unified truth. A problem with this approach, I fear, and it has some popularity that folds in with the popularity of Strauss, is that the problems of relativism can be boiled down to a lack of optimism over the communicative capacities of people, whether that's communication with God, for example, prayer, or communication with each other in terms of fully sharing one's experience. The whole project of saying that one person's experience cannot be represented by someone who did not have that experience is an assumption over the limits to our ability to communicate. So is one following that argument, following those assumptions too neatly by creating a sense that you can erect barriers of communication in the layers of your meaning that preserve culture or education, knowledge, the transcendentals from being overrun by majoritarian views? The fifth option is René Girard. So, for those who don't know, René Girard is a French social anthropologist, social theorist, who writes about the way in which we, by nature, are imitative of each other, and through that imitation, we collide through competition over wanting the same things. In that tension, the only resolution can come through the scapegoat, for whom the person is blamed for all of the rivalry, and through his or her elimination can restore harmony. Girard takes this anthropologically, identifying a plethora of examples of where imitative desire is resolved through elimination of the scapegoat. It takes a Christian turn at a certain point by giving an argument from anthropology for Jesus Christ, saying that as ultimate sacrifice, he brings social harmony to humanity. Could it be, therefore, that a fifth way is to take the role of the scapegoat to restore harmony to the university? This is distinct from my first one, victimhood. When a group adopts the victimhood stance, they explain to others that they are the victim, and that gives them equal rights for participation on grounds of vulnerability or exclusion. In total contrast to that, the role of the scapegoat is to be accused of evil, to therefore be perceived as evil, and to never claim victimhood. The tough point here is that a proper scapegoat must be hated by both sides. So when people think in terms of the vulnerability of those who pursue holistic conceptions of the truth, or the university's role in the moral formation of students, is that they quickly map onto debates between liberal and conservative and feel that the conservative stance is sort of under threat. In their sense of scapegoat or victimhood, it is that camp that is the victim. But a detailed reading of Girard suggests that it must be that both sides hate this scapegoat. That means liberals and conservatives. So one needs someone or a group of people or institution or whatever to be hated by everyone, and through its elimination to bring about a greater harmony to the university that then can open up the way to its pursuit of truth. So this person or group would be hated not just because they are discriminatory, homophobic, racist, but also they seem to have no belief in freedom of speech, the traditions of the university, its cultural heritage. This is something that would make you hated by both sides. I don't see any group able to play that role. Christians in particular struggle to play that role because their theological grounding is in the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So the notion of scapegoat is orientated to that sacrifice historically. And so Christians in this sense, in their school of thought, are very close to the idea that we need to focus on eroding a sense of guilt through redemption. Okay, so I hope in this there's been a bit of interesting points of discussion. Just by way of close, I will say that the reason for the initial example, the initial story of the man who's made into a husband, made into a father, but has to rush off, is precisely this idea that you are named, and in being named, you have a debt to pay off. And so the pros and cons of each individual argument, I'm keen, but if there's a single takeaway, it's to emphasize to you each individually that you live in debt. And if this place is not somewhere where you can pay off your debt, you better find a place where you can pay it off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Yeah, great. Do you want to come back up and I'll ask if there are any questions? I'm not going to use my privilege to
That's
take all the
the
questions.
closest I've ever got to an encore.
So far. Father George?
I wanted to thank you so much. Fascinating and lots to think about. I wanted to go back to the beginning when you were contrasting or looking at things. You used the example from McIntyre, spoke about McIntyre and the multi-university, as it were, and spoke about the difficulty of holding together forms of natural knowledge with social or ethical knowledge. You didn't say ethical, but with social, but I wonder if one could add ethical. And also then with the challenge of a university where truth is not shown to have a relationship with being. And I wonder if you might apply any of your 5 responses to those 2 issues. I mean, one of those, not both of them, but just how does one in the university help to show a relationship between truth and being, or truth as personal, or the natural and the social? Do you think there's a way of applying what you said at the end to those questions from the beginning?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. So it's a difficult one. I struggle with this as an Englishman because in the continent and in North America, they have retained quite a strong sense of admiration towards top professors. And in my sort of English liberty streak, one is nervous of assigning authority to a person versus an idea. And something about the German academy is carried over to the US, in particular on that front. And I'm nervous about the idea that students should be encouraged to be sort of disciples of an individual teacher. But this is one route to associating notions of truth with being, in the sense that you encounter a person, not just a theory or an idea. And the fact is that I think on this front, this Englishness is wrong, and I have to work to overcome it, because when you speak to students, invariably it will be a particular teacher that has inspired them down a certain route. And you have in this university, among the graduate community, all kinds of students who were basically inspired in their undergraduate by a certain professor, who then find it difficult to translate that inspiration to the competitive research-led environment when they no longer have that personal contact. And this university sometimes struggles to provide it as an alternative. So I have to check myself on this. It helps when the person is dead, because then when you fall in love with them, you're not going to foster their pride, which can take them away from a love of God. So if possible, fall in love with a dead person. But either way, we have to admit that we're relational by nature, and an encounter with truth is an encounter with being.
Another question, yes. Sure. There's a request that those who have questions stand up and maybe speak up so that it can be heard throughout the chapel. Thank you. Is there another question? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this very thought-provoking lecture. I guess I have two kind of huge but connected and I think really pressing questions. The first is this. I want to maybe offer a sixth model and see what you think of it. I think of a few years ago, the theologian Paul Griffiths resigned his chair at Duke Divinity School under a bunch of controversy. I have a kind of mixed position on the controversy, but that's not the point. In one of his emails, he wrote this. Our mission is to think, read, write, and teach about the triune Lord of Christian confession. This is a hard thing. Each of us should be tense with the effort of it, thrumming like a faulty, triple-woven steel thread with the work of it, consumed by the fire of it, ever eager for the more of it. We have neither time nor resources to waste. And what I take away from this passage is that people who are consumed with the kind of big work of seeing the connection between the transcendentals have time for nothing else. And so the first question is, why should those who do see this truth-seeking as necessary to what they do care about the kind of, on some level, petty politics of what goes on at universities? And the second question is, if they can't get the kind of influence at universities that they quote-unquote need, why are they bonded to the universities? Why can't they go elsewhere? There seem to be institutions of learning that allow for creative new approaches to the intellectual life that aren't included in the university. Whatever one thinks of Descartes, did what he did outside the university, and did the novelties that he did, and thought the brilliant, even if misled thoughts that he thought, specifically by challenging the scholastic consensus in the universities. And so I guess my second question is why that shouldn't be an option for us, if it shouldn't be an option for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's a really brilliant point. I think it's a good route. I think that the struggle comes in the sense with which universities, the top universities, are a repository of knowledge, a repository of culture. So in one's passion, love for the truth, one can abandon them and go it alone. That could be even go with community. But insofar as the repository lies within the university, one can struggle with the depth of history, culture from outside. Related to that, though different, is the humble point that we're not even sure what total dedication of truth means, and sometimes we need to learn it. So you have, for example, in the top universities, extremely capable people, some of whom through that capacity can take on that total dedication to the truth, but not when they arrive, because they don't know what's at stake yet. So the fear is that if someone goes it alone in a sort of hermit style with the passion and love of truth, is one abandoning those people. So in covenantal terms, we are a community, such that my responsibility is not just towards devotion of God, but also to the support of others in their devotion of God. But I do think it is possibly the best route. A complement to that has got to be a kind of sense with which you can travel to all the cities of the university, meeting people who are in that zone. So the cultural repository of what the university used to stand for is retained by that global community, many of whom lie outside the university, many of whom do not have status in the kind of conventional modern sense. If instead it's just in one place, then you don't have the exposure to dialogue and debate that would foster oneself in one's limited capacity towards the deepest truths. That would be my...
Well, thank you. Just on the back of what Jarek said there, thank you for mentioning Descartes. I had a friend when I was studying in Cambridge who always said that he didn't want his degree to get in the way of his education, which I always found quite fun. And one of the things I'm aware of as a chapel intern, we're entering a study as of next year, is the risk that we idolatrize our academic work and that we become less holistic because we become so specialized. And I think that's a particular risk in the competitive environment in which the university now inevitably operates. So do you have any views on how we might temper that as a community so that we continue to be well-rounded individuals, which I think is an important part of our education here, right?
Yeah, thanks, that's great. It's a definite danger. This is in very kind of secular language, why I have this kind of concern with the decline of schools of thought, because that was a way of having a sort of intellectual community that would mean the great discoveries are not actually, the key question is not whether they are personally attributable to me. And what's interesting also about schools of thought is that they tend to extend out of the academy, much to the world's detriment. So you have Marxists who are a group, they are students, they're faculty, they have all kinds of internal divisions, and they spill out into school education, into government, into international development. They are excelling at being outward looking. And that is quite remarkable because, of course, you can, we all appreciate, Marx wrote a lot and he has some really interesting ideas. So it's perfectly reasonable to think I devote my life totally to just studying the text and being the expert in Marx. And yet you have that whole sort of outreach. And what you don't see the modern university are people who are keen to sacrifice career goals because of a school of thought. That could be, for example, saying the status of the university is secondary to whether I am with the group of scholars who are going to foster my area of interest. You have this even with PhD programs, and you can speak to all kinds of graduate students here, And they will really weigh up. This supervisor is better in this lower ranking university, but for job prospects, I should really go with the Oxford DPhil. And one has to ask, so what is the overall goal here? And they'll say, well, the academic job market is so difficult. So in the end, what we have is, at that opportunity and numerous others, a sense in which really is the status which is primary, even though under the old school of thought world, you would still have status by having worked under that great figure within that school of thought, among others of that school of thought, who then trust you all the more with whatever teaching or jobs that you have. So I think it is definitely a central problem. And people have such fear of the academic job market that they are decreasingly likely to take risks in following ideas rather than status. But you just have to point out, I think, consistently how some of the best theorists, is obvious in philosophy, have their ideas generating for a long time outside of traditional institutional structures. They don't become beholden to status, often despised for their views or considered unpopular or not worth listening to. But they have to work with the idea that I'm aiming at death. So I'm aiming at what I can achieve by the time I die, such that the recognition need not be in my lifetime, or there need be no recognition at all unless there's recognition in God. So that is about what your sense of meaning of life is, your priorities, and it has to be inviting of a hard road, of little money, little status.
Thank you so much for a really fascinating talk. I couldn't help... Okay, is this good? Can you hear me? Sweet. So I couldn't help but think of Francis Bacon the whole time, because on one hand, knowledge is power is sort of the tagline that the Frankfurt School in particular loves to sort of pin on Bacon, but also because in the New Atlantis, we have the sort of model of what the modern university comes to be in the House of Solomon, which is this sort of institute that Bacon takes as the sort of utopic representation of what his scientific method implies. And I think in this research institute where people are going around conducting experiments and sort of figuring out how the natural world works, there's a kind of harmonizing of both truth, social utopia, as well as material progress. And this institute later went on to sort of serve as the model for the Royal Society. Late 17th century, it goes on to sort of be a model of what collective truth-seeking could be in a research context. But of course, Bacon saw the natural world as the product of a god, of the god, right? And so saw the sort of research pursuit that ended up in works that improved our material conditions and also sort of gave us a stab at social utopia as being a part of this project of truth-seeking. So there's a way in which at the origin, or at least maybe one of the origins we can point to of what the modern university is, there was a harmony between what we see as truth-seeking on one hand, and then the utopia experiment, as well as the improving of material well-being that you pointed to as being decidedly split today. So I suppose one question would be, do you see the possibility for having a sort of coherent project that could refuse those three branches outside of a theological sort of thick metaphysic? And second of all, if we do believe that there is a kind of like divine theological coherence behind all of these projects, shouldn't we trust that the seeking out of research and material well-being improvements should lead us one way or another to discover that truth?
Yeah, thanks a lot. There's a lot to think about there. I think I'd approach it first of all by saying that much of that sense of the harmony of reason and progress through that sort of New Atlantist makes some assumptions about the nature of God and therefore the unity of the universe that you discover. This is a typical observation in a different example, Adam Smith, where you have historians of Adam Smith very committed to the notion of divine providence that motivates his sense of the invisible hand. And that plays itself out with confidence in market dynamics in modern economic departments, minus any notion of divine providence. And in fact, they now characterize divine providence as sort of perhaps an excuse for why market dynamics sometimes go wrong and harm people, but we should do them anyway. Or maybe that's what they would have meant by divine providence, which is, of course, very little to do with Smith's notion. So we are operating, even in this context of a university of rationalism, with a lot of assumptions about causation that are inspired in theology. And we yet can have huge mileage minus that vocabulary, or even forgetting some of that history of thought. And I do think there is a lot of mileage in a sort of rationalist approach. The challenge I put to it is the distinction between logos and logic. And we struggle, for example, with self-determination of happiness and the role of material goods within our likelihood of happiness. And so in a context where you have depravity and material poverty, it can be easy to direct university towards the alleviation of those things through innovation and technology, and that being in line with the quest of human flourishing. But the tough point here are those, for example, scholars who work on Charles Taylor, etc., who see that a lot of people's sense of well-being is bound up with a narrative about themselves and their identity, for which they actually seek some insulation from the judgment of others in their sense of peace, security, well-being. And so the sort of utopian community that comes from the Royal Academy is relational and communicative. But that's not where everyone is in terms of their understanding of well-being. And therefore, it can't simply be in their view that I am sort of sucked into someone else's project. So in this sense, if one sees it in terms of it is logical, then they would say, not my logic. And instead, the notion of logos becomes then dependent on discovery of the thing outside yourself, which changes your notion of well-being itself. So it's a case that I really think there's huge mileage, but there's a limit to it, and the limit is becoming increasingly relevant in terms of students' description of what they want to get out of university.
So there's probably time for one or two more questions, and we'll try to wrap up around 20 past. So Cameron, would you like to?
Hi, thank you for this really interesting talk. Closer, yeah. Specifically, you're talking about the university's role in the moral formation of students, and how, like, the university has failed to do that. Where do you see the line drawn between the church and the university as far as what tasks are delegated to the church and what tasks are delegated to the university, particularly public universities, or think like non-Christian universities, I guess, something like Oxford? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, thanks so much. So on this front, just to add scandal upon scandal in my commentary, on this front I see almost no difference, because advice giving is human. And so insofar as we say any institution or set of people should not engage in advice giving. I think we go against social nature. So I see no real relevant distinction between educational institutions and churches, religious organizations, associational groups, families, on the point of advice giving. And the challenge instead is the fact that advice giving has a decreased space. In fact, is often totally eliminated. It could be eliminated on grounds of saying you don't want to kind of export your bias to other people. It could be on grounds of legal liability, that you are sort of recommending a course of action which, if taken and leading to harm, you are therefore at fault for. It can also be challenged by a notion of expertise. On this, I like the work of Alistair McIntyre on After Virtue, who will reflect about the specialized role of the manager of institutions. And the manager, in a way, is organizing appropriate delegation from the perspective of what would continue that institution in existence, not the well-being of any particular individual. But if you are truly committed to advice, you have to bear in mind, you have to believe that I may need to sacrifice my institution in order to save that individual. So I will break the rules because this person needs it right now, even though the institution will go away. And that is, cannot be countenanced by the university administration. And it's a shame because in the context where you have a government that is not friendly to the pursuit of truth, organizing measures of compliance or your statutory privileges for your operation, it means that they are unwilling to sacrifice that institutional longevity for the particular goods of freedom of inquiry or opposing a kind of orthodox political opinion. But in terms of there being any difference, I would, of course, say that there is a voluntary quality to religious participation, which deepens one's common set of values that can be more readily assumed in the advice giving, which cannot be done readily in a secular university. And there is a sacramental role for the church, which the university a secular university should never seek to imitate.
I'll ask something very quick and then ask for the final question, which is maybe being formed in one of your heads at this point. Which of your 5 answers or responses or ways, let's say, do you think is most proximate and might have the most immediate results in the university you find yourself part of?
Yeah, so personally, I see myself trying out the Thomas More route, never being able to imitate anything about his qualities, but just strictly speaking on the point of method of flattery, which is crazy. It sounds very dishonest to say. But the fact is that I believe top universities have so much good about them that a gentle swaying of them can lead to great good for a lot of people. And I've, could be considered an academic for 8 years since completing my DPhil. But for 7 years of my life, I've been an altar server. Obviously, I did other things on the side. And although literally altar serving is on the side. And I appreciate from that time that you can serve something greater than you and play a role, therefore, in its greatness for other people. And you are a junior member. You are not even needed, okay? Strictly speaking, you're not even needed. But in liturgy and in the beauty of participation done, in service of other people, you do bring out the goodness inherent to the practice. So I do think that, and I've probably made mistakes in emphasizing that term flattery, but endorsing, respecting, promoting the noblest ideals within someone even when they are overall bad, can have a huge influence, either evident directly or indirectly through the example you give others of the possibility of being just a server and not actually achieving anything for yourself.
Is there one last question?
How much do you see the passage of time as an opportunity for compromise or corruption of truth-seeking as one generation hands the baton to the next?
Do you like post-truth? There is this argument that things are eroding, falling apart, and you can't be in that quest simply of preserving or just waiting things out. And basically, I'm a firm believer in that, although it may frustrate some who love preservation as the best route. And obviously, there's a rich body of thought within conservatism in that regard. But the problem comes for me in the way in which the idea knowledge is power is not just a fashion. So if it was just a fashion, I would wait it out. But I see that argument as so robust when you have no notion of God, which sociologically is the case for most people involved in the elite universities. It is so robust as an argument that I don't see any way around it by just waiting it out. So when you adopt that premise that every part of discourse or relationship is governed by relationships of power that make people do things they would otherwise not do, in the assumption behind all that is this utopian sense that an individual can act without any interaction with others and therefore be allowed to do or be able to do whatever it is that they would like to do, which meets with this point about people seeking authenticity and self-narrative such that they can have insulation against the judgments of others. If that becomes center stage, as I kind of see it is, I don't see any real stopping of that argument, and I don't see some sort of assertion of our relational quality being fundamentally communicative coming from any scholarship, any philosophers that are considered, mainstream in shaping. If you take political theory as an example, you are not finding any political theorist who will stand up to a Foucauldian, to a feminist, to someone working on sex, gender identity, and saying that, no, we are perfectly capable of communicating to others our experiences such that someone without those experiences can fully represent that view in the public sphere. If you're not having that argument at all, then there's no space over time for a secular defense of the university in the face of the argument knowledge is power.
Thank you so much. We'll end here. For those who would like to stay for evening prayer, you're welcome to. It'll start in about 5 minutes. And with that, we'd like to give you a second round of applause. Thank you so much for participating in our Recollection. Thank you very much for coming. Good evening.